Okay, first I want to start off the video by saying thank you to FF1 for the signal boost. I've just gotten a whole lot of new subscribers from that. It means so much, thank you. On to the video. I've got some observations from the Saudi GP. Some perhaps not so flavorful. Observation number 1. The track isn't safe. It's very surprising it's gotten onto the calendar in its current guise. At this point, it's probably worthwhile to talk about circuit bragging rights and target bragging rights, you know, like the bragging rights that circuits aim for in their construction, and how the Middle East is using that, and how some circuit bragging rights should probably be banned. For instance, you probably shouldn't be aiming for the fastest street circuit after Baku has been introduced to the calendar. That's just, you know, that's just a little bit of common sense. That would have been some common sense from the FIA, but I suppose the money's too good from the Middle East to turn it down. But, you know, at the end of the day, there are some circuit bragging rights that probably should be banned. You don't get to aim for fastest street circuit. Just put some real corners in there. If there's a fuck huge long straight, then there's a fuck huge long straight. You'll get it from that. But otherwise, you shouldn't really, on principle, I believe, you shouldn't be making a street circuit with like fast winding S's. Mind you, Vietnam is probably going to be the same thing if we ever go there. I wonder what's happened to that Grand Prix. But yeah, this circuit is pretty unsafe. The money must be worth. The FIA must have a lot of faith in their cars, because I'm sure they were holding their breath when Mick Schumacher had his crash, especially considering that the electrics of the car actually died on impact, so the team had no radio. Can you imagine like being the team? You sat there on the pit wall, you've just seen this huge accident. There's definitely a whole lot of G-forces involved over there. And the electrics cut out, you can't actually contact the driver. And then the driver's not actually getting out the car in a hurry. You're like, okay. Okay, this is a little scary. And I was actually wondering when watching the qualifying, like, why the Haas personnel? Like, surely Mick has been on the radio, you know, telling them like, I'm just winded over here. You know, I'm just gonna wait for these guys to pull me out. No, you know, they didn't get any of that, so they were looking hella stressed in that Haas garage. But yeah, Peter Winsor did make an observation of the circuit. You know, just put some proper corners with real braking zones in the first sector, and you've made it 10 times safe already. As is, just the huge speed you carry through that first sector, and the current cars, if they bottom out on a curb, I mean, we saw the Mick Schumacher crash. It's a disaster. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the circuit, you give it a decade, maybe 2 decades with no changes as it is, something bad is probably gonna happen. So yeah, let's hope the track gets changed. You can drop the bragging rights. You don't really need to be the fastest street circuit on the F1 calendar. Yeah, that's a weird one. I'm very surprised that the FIA were okay with, you know, a country or an organizer aiming for fastest street circuit in F1 post Baku. Baku exists. They run down a highway for like 2 kilometers or something. And just before we delve into the whole circuit bragging rights and the Middle Eastern circuits, it's going to be really hard for Saudi Arabia, Jeddah, I suppose. It's going to be really hard for them to make alterations to the circuit, because it is on a marina. There's limited land to work with. Now, of course, Saudi Arabia could do a land reclamation project at any time, and that would be that. But I mean, it's just so extensive. I don't see them doing that. So here's how it probably gets down. The Middle Eastern bloc wants the Middle East wants a Middle Eastern bloc of Grand Prix. That's very obvious right now. It was obvious before, but it's very obvious right now. They're right on the cusp of completing it. They need their circuits to have a unique appeal compared to the European circuit. So they've got Twilight Circuit, they've got Night Race Circuit, they've got Street Night Race on faster circuit, they've got a street circuit that cuts through a castle. You know, they've got all these wild type of selling points on their circuits, okay? Here's what happens with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia goes to the FIA. They say, we want a Grand Prix. How much will it cost? The FIA says, whatever, 500 mil, I suppose, for 5 years. $1 billion for 10 years. Saudi Arabia, of course, says, yeah, money's no object. Here you go. We want the circuit around our marina. And now the FIA's interest gets piqued. Oh, okay, you're not going to make a purpose-built circuit? No, we want it around the marina. And we want it to be the fastest F1 street circuit. Now the FIA might, I don't know about that. You might have to pay us a little more. Saudi Arabia, money's no object. It's a 1.5 bill contract for 10 years. Easy money. It's easy money for both sides, mind you. And then, of course, they bring in Tilke. Tilke's given carte blanche, here's the marina, we want fastest street circuit, money's no object, do your thing. And of course Tilke does his thing, and now they're hosting a Grand Prix. It's gonna be a regular. Came onto the calendar fresh for COVID. It's interesting, right? They were ready. They were ready in very short order for this Grand Prix. It's quite interesting. Meanwhile, Vietnam was cancelled. I really wonder what's happening with that Vietnam deal. I really wonder. There must be some there's either some really upset investors somewhere, or they got their money back. I hope they got their money back. I really do. Anyway. Observation number 2. Mick Schumacher is finally stepping up. Now, it's weird with Mick. I was willing to actually give him the season to acclimatize to the new cars because, of course, he's got this narrative about him. I'm not sure if it's a narrative, if it's actually just a trait of his, where first year in a new formula, he struggles a lot, then the years after that he's really good. So I was really suspect of Mick Schumacher actually coming into F1 for the last year or 2 years of a formula. But it seems that having Kevin Magnussen next to him as teammate has, prompted him to step up. And he was driving really well that weekend before that crash. Really well. Now, my hope is that he actually can continue that form. Going into Australia, going into Imola, going into these next races. My hope is that he actually does continue that form. If he doesn't, then question marks might start arising. But I know for sure there were question marks after Bahrain around Mick Schumacher about him really being up for this F1 thing or not. But I'm glad for him that this Jeddah performance came out, even though he didn't get to race, because it looked, by all accounts, he had passed the eye test for the weekend, right? So there's that. Good luck to Mick. Unlucky he got to miss the race. But hey, he's alive, right? So, you gotta choose your battles on this one. 3. All right, observation number 3 from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix weekend. The DRS games are back. They are back. I said they're back. It's not that Magnussen has innovated some new fangled way to go racing with these cars. It's just that the games are back. I would probably, without having driven the cars, right? We're just normal people out here. Without having driven the cars, I would probably say that the DRS Mickey Mouse games are more viable now in the current cars than they were with the previous spec of car, just because it's not all that punishing to be behind another car right now. So yeah, the DRS Mickey Mouse games are back. The first time that I saw them actually occurring on circuit was the Canadian Grand Prix of 2013. I guess because of the regulations back then and just that, DRS was still a new thing. There was perhaps less experimentation with these type of games around the DRS, but now it's back, and it's really good, right? We could argue that it's probably the best solution to be second driver into all of these DRS straights, right? It's probably the best solution to just be the second driver, unless it's the final lap of the Grand Prix. There's your only exception, basically. But yeah, Magnussen has revived these DRS games, and we are in an era where there are some really talented drivers on the grid who might do some really hair-raising things with the DRS games being permitted the way they are. Okay, now should the FIA police this? I don't believe they should. There's some people who will say they should. I don't actually. Here's the thing, right? You could say that if there were drivers behind them, if they were doing this brake test, call it a brake. There's only brake test if there's a car behind you. If they were doing this excessive braking like this, jockeying for the DRS line, if they were doing this and there's a gaggle of cars behind them, it's dangerous. But it's kind of self-policing in that they wouldn't be doing this if there was a gaggle of cars behind you. You wouldn't be doing this anyway. Because if there's a gaggle of cars behind you, they're keeping you honest, so you can't be playing these games with people. You only play these games with people when you're kind of the only people in that section of the track. And at that point, it's just racing, right? At that point, it's just racing. Leclerc and Verstappen have done really well. Leclerc's first jockey for the DRS position was just genius. It was frankly just genius. When he tried to let Verstappen go down the inside and Verstappen didn't want it, and he just decided to, okay, just put the foot down and just power through this final corner and just go down the straight. That was genius. That was a genius piece of driving. I thought he had won the race off of that, but Verstappen and this Red Bull are going to be incredibly quick this year. Incredibly quick. Reliable is a different story, but they will definitely match the Ferraris on pace every weekend, unless one of them has a real mare going into said weekend. And the final and fourth observation from Jeddah, there will only be 4 observations, I believe. The final observation from Jeddah is that Mercedes car is really bad. It is really, really bad. They have to run a perfect weekend to get 5th and 6th. Now, if they're off on a detail here or there, you could have a Hamilton weekend for both of the drivers. Let's say we get to a circuit where the car is just really not suited to the circuit. It could be even worse there. So, for instance, I'm not actually expecting Mercedes to have a good car in Australia and Imola, particularly Imola, and maybe Miami as well, although we'll have to see what the circuit actually looks like when we get there. But Imola and Australia, I'm not expecting Mercedes to have a good car there, because there's some corners with a really fast change of direction, and they've got a high center of gravity on their car because of the vertically packed innards. I say vertically packed like, they're stacked on top of each other, but they're just narrowed and tighter, more compact. So it's interesting how the engineers at Mercedes didn't see this coming. I mean, one would expect, right? Some Mercedes engineers, probably geniuses, overqualified. They've got all the tools at their disposal, your CFD, your wind tunnels, the whole lot. And somehow they haven't seen this coming. So they've stacked the innards high and narrow within the car in order to accommodate their zero parts. And on another year that might work if they had more wind tunnel time, I suppose. Maybe that might work. Although, here's the problem with their car. The wind tunnel in CFD would never show up a high center of gravity. That would just be from really engineering basics. So they stacked the innards, or compacted the innards narrowly, and everyone else on the grid has frankly gone wide and low, as possible. Ferrari, wide and low. Red Bull, wide and low. Haas, wide and low. Alpine, wide and low. Everyone's going for wide and low setup. Not setup, packaging for their car's innards. You know, the radiators, the engine, fuel tank, the battery kit, all of that. Everyone's trying to go for wide and low packaging. Mercedes have gone narrow and high for whatever reason. And the engineers, these genius engineers at Mercedes, they haven't cottoned on to this in the design phase. Now, I'm no genius, but I'm no fucking genius. But that should have been really obvious to Mercedes, what exactly they were doing with their car. So I would be very surprised if by Spain they haven't reverted to a more traditional packaging solution. I would be very surprised, because that would be telling me that, one, they are actually convinced by their zero pods concept, and they will accommodate whatever sacrifices they have to in order to make the zero pods work. Now, does the concept have that much potential? I don't believe so. Truly, I don't believe so. I think, they could maybe push that concept for 2 seasons, maybe 3 seasons, but after that, just because of the way the car is packaged, unless they come up with some crazy suspension solution, they have to do something about their suspension as well. I was watching Peter Winsor, of course. I was watching Peter Winsor, Scarbs, during the preseason, and Scarbs made a Peter Scarborough, I believe it's Peter Scarborough. I might be wrong with that. He might be a David Scarborough, right? But I think it's Peter Scarborough and Peter Winsor. Scarbs made an interesting point in that, and this was something I had completely no idea about until he said it, and that is that the suspension geometry matters a lot more in these ground effects cars than you might at first think. Now, if I look at the Mercedes, their suspension can't actually hold up their car when it's aero loaded, so you get porpoising. Red Bull, I'm not sure what Newey's done there, but Newey's a very interesting one. He is the only designer on the grid right now to have had previous experience with ground effects cars, because he actually worked in F1 for the previous ground effects era. What was that, 70s or something? He was in F1. He wasn't a designer, he was just a mechanic for which team, I forget. Might have been Leighton House, but don't quote me on that, but it might have been Leighton House. But yeah, he's the only designer on the grid with previous experience of ground effects, and it's quite telling that the Red Bull is the only car that can be run that can be run as low to the ground, like when we had the flat floors, they can still run the car that low, just because I knew we had the cheat sheet on. Yeah, you actually have to figure out your suspension geometry before you start throwing your ground effects downforce on this car, and he's done that. And quite frankly, the car looks beautiful in motion. And quite frankly, the car does look beautiful in motion. And Ferrari, they were, of course, present for all years of F1, so they can dig into their archives for solutions on how to make ground effects cars work. Mercedes don't have that. Mercedes do not have that. They've gone with the most ambitious concept on the grid with their zero pods. And they don't have... And this seems to be ignored a lot. They won the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes. They won it. So what does that mean for the new season? They have the lowest competitive budget of all the teams, and they've got the least wind tunnel time. Now, how exactly they plan to go into the season with most ambitious side pod concept, a completely different internal packaging concept to everyone, they haven't actually had knowledge of suspension geometry being so pivotal to these cars, because they weren't in motorsport for all of those formative years, right? Mercedes were still staying out of the motorsports limelight, trying to recover from the 1955 disaster at Le Mans. So they haven't been in motorsports for all this time. The last time they came in with the ambition to really shake up the engineering game, they had a CLK GTR doing backflips at Le Mans. So Mercedes, when they come into these things, they don't have the experience that all these other manufacturers and designers have. They don't have the experience Adrian Newey, just one man, has. They definitely don't have the experience that Ferrari has. Now Williams is an interesting one. Williams, by all accounts, should have done better here, but at the same time, Williams are just completely in the doldrums right now. They probably don't even have like IQ within the building to make a fast car anyway. This might get rude. But yeah, those are the Saudi observations. Mercedes, quite frankly, just have to accept that they've made a boo-boo on their design decisions here and just go back to a more traditional concept. The DRS Mickey Mouse games, they'll be interesting for this season. They'll be interesting for this formula, I should say, because I don't actually see them falling away after a season, just because of the characteristics of the cars. The cars can follow really close this season. If you have performance over the car in front of you, then you're on his ass all the time. That's pretty much how this formula is going to work. Mick Schumacher stepping up. Let's hope he maintains this form after this crash. And the track isn't safe. Those are all the observations. 2 decades of racing at this Jeddah circuit, and I guarantee some type of fuckery will happen, unless they modify the circuit, slow it down in some way. They really should slow it down in some way, but I digress. That's for future FIA to deal with. Today's FIA definitely don't want to deal with it. They got the bag. They're happy. Okay, these have been my observations from the Saudi Arabian Formula 1 Grand Prix. Hope you have a good day. Hope you enjoyed the watch. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, whichever you're doing.